give it one more minute here and we'll get going. Thanks everybody for joining this morning. I want to start out by just saying that there is a Q&A or a chat feature on everyone's screen. Use the Q&A, ask your questions as you come along. Hopefully everybody here knows, and if you don't, we'll get you introduced to him soon. But Sean Ridge is on with us today, and he will answer some Q&As for things that he can do. I don't know why my screen keeps going forward here. He'll answer some questions in the Q&A during it, but we will stop halfway through to answer any questions live, kind of go over them briefly and make sure everybody gets those. We will also send out an email to all panelists that joined today, hopefully by the end of next week, I'd say, to all the attendees with all the questions and answers, everything that we can answer for you. So if there's anything I don't know today or we can't get answered today, we'll get those answered before we send the email out. So make sure you pop up that Q&A or that chat button. I will keep looking at those, and Sean's going to help me do that. For Mike, Zach, Devin, everyone, good morning. Thanks for getting everything together here. Really appreciate that. So it's 11:05. Looks like our attendees are starting to slow down, but hopefully some more people will join us as we go. Again, this will be recorded. We can get this out to everybody. And after the class is over, we can get the recording together, get that out to everybody at Hurley Engineering, everybody else that's helping us today. And again, that question and answer. So if you do want this recording available, just get a hold of your local sales rep at Hurley, or talk to your Sean, your local Viessmann guy. And with that, we'll get going. Again, make sure we do use that Q&A. I want to get all your questions answered, so ask them today. And please ask all your questions. I may not know all the answers, but with all the good guys we got working with us, we'll get the answers for those together. My name's Patrick O'Brien. I've been with Viessmann just under a year now. I've been in the industry ever since I was a little boy. My family owns a wholesaler in upstate New York. So a little bit colder than maybe some of you guys out there on the West Coast, but probably just the same as some of my guys in those elevations. I've been in the business my entire life, and really enjoy this whole training portion of it. It's good to get out and see everybody across the nation, and the differences really from being stuck in the Northeast for the beginning to getting out across the nation and later in my life. So ask your questions, new and old, and again, Q&A or chat. But today we're going to talk about the new Vitodens 100 and 200. Don't know if we have anybody new here that hasn't installed any Vitodens equipment in the past. If you have, you'll see some of these nice changes that have come along with them. And if you're new to Viessmann, I think you're going to really enjoy everything we have to offer. But today we'll talk about the Vitodens 100 and 200. But I also want to point out the rest of our residential line. Well, you'll see here with our 222, which is a floor mount, has a little indirect tank inside of it, as well as being kind of a combi, and that Vito Crossel 300, a CU3A, as well as our indirect tank. So this kind of rounds out our residential line. And when we look at this Vitodens 222 and our CU3A, this 300 series here, when we talk about the control packages, you'll see this control actually move into these boilers here in the near future. So keep that in mind. We're going to do some nice things that we'll talk about here throughout the presentation. But as far as the 100, we've expanded the offering and BTU sizes, and then we've updated the 200 series, as you can see here, from the 85 to 199. For any of our patrons out there still using the 200 and the larger series, up to those 530s, those are still with us, and they're just staying the same for right now. So today we're going to talk about a total of 10 different models. You're going to have 4 200 models, 4 100 models. These would all be your heat onlys. And then we have two combis in the 100, a 120 and a 199, and we'll talk about their capacities. For anybody new to us, all of our nomenclature is going to look like this on our boilers. So today we'll talk about a Vitodens 100, or this one might change to a 200 for our 200 segment. It's going to be a W because they are all wall mount or wall hung boilers. And then for the quick nomenclature, B for boiler, 1 would be our 100 series, or this would be a 2 for a 200 series. A K for any of our combis, which are only available in a 100, or an H for a heat only, and then E at the end. This is going to be our electronic package. This is end-to-end electronics. So from one end of our portfolio all the way to the other, we're going to have the same electronics and the packaging inside. Other things that come pre-built into the boiler is you're going to see that there's now Wi-Fi built right in. So if some of our past customers using those Vito Connects, they came standard with that CU3A, or as an add-on for some of the other 200s and such. Now this is built right into the boiler, which will give you a lot of information at the tip of your, right at your fingertips. That can go right to the homeowner through the VCare app, which has been out and used for quite a while now, with some upgrades happening recently. But also the contractor has a Vito Guide app now. The Vito Guide app can also, with permission from the homeowner, allow the contractor to have remote monitoring of this boiler after it's installed. That is live right now, so you can just go to your App Store, Google Play Store, and download Vito Guide app. And we'll get into that a little bit towards after the break here in the middle. But for the 100 and the 200, they both can be a standalone boiler. They're both fully modulating and condensing, reaching up to or over 95% efficient. Natural gas or propane out of the box, and we'll talk about how there's no longer any mechanical changeover to that. The boiler's simply going to ask you the question and answer it with your fuel type. They have on-off control logic, so we are looking for that end switch to come back to it, or a feedback from something to engage the boiler to run. They can now run on fixed set point or outdoor reset operation. DHW is available, all of them with an indirect tank for all the heat onlys, or the on-demand or instantaneous with those two combi models. The 100 still has its 4-pipe quick connection design. That's also been upgraded and added to your 200 series as well now. So now that 200 has its own internal pump and 3-way valve. Wall mount, or we do have a floor stand. So if there's not a viable wall to mount it on, we do have a nice, easy, quick mount, hang the boiler right on it. They're simple and easy to install, wire, pipe, program, maintain, and service. For service classes, we're not really going to go through a lot of that today, but if you have questions, please ask them and look for those service classes coming on down the road. For the 200, what's going to set you apart and things that are built into the 200 that are not going to be in a 100, you have a built-in cascade up to 15 boilers. We're just going to daisy chain 18 gauge. We would recommend shielded wire. There'd be a 3-wire. We can do that right with the built-in control, so no more external cascade control. Common venting on all sizes, so even those little 85s, we can do up to 4 boilers. As well as with the E-series boilers, we can now sidewall terminate. I know that opens up a whole slew of possibilities in a lot of mechanical rooms, especially in commercial settings, for sidewall termination, especially in cascade. 3 heating zones in the 200. Previously, they were known as zone circuits in the HBs. So we can do 3 heat zones. That would be your traditional thermostat on off, and then it would have a pump relay corresponding with it. So 3 additional pump relays in your 200. As well as with an additional module, you could use your 4 heat circuits. That would be a European constant circulation. This does require an ADIO module, but they work with mixing valves, pump modules, solar configurations, and all those good things we can talk about a little bit more in depth if necessary. There's built-in 0 to 10 volt So the boiler can take a 10 volt, 0 to 10 volt input based on either temperature or percentage of firing rate. It'll also put a 0 to 10 volt output with the current burner position. So if you want to read that 0 to 10 volt back to real old school BMS system, or possibly maybe you want to run a VFD pump and 0 to 10 volt off of it as well to make sure you have that constant delta T you're looking for regardless outdoor temperature. So you got a lot of options there. Those floor racks I talked about that are available for a single boiler. When you get into the 200, since we can cascade them, we do have manifold racks. These would be the floor stand racks for the boiler to hang on, but they have a manifold with low loss headers. They just bolt right together. This will save you a lot of time and guys on a cascade job. And they are all capable of doing your BMS or BAS integration. It would require a secondary control dependent on what system you're running in the house. To look at some of the specs, today you'll hear me talk about a small chassis and a large chassis. So I want to say the 85 and 120, I'll refer to usually as a small chassis or the smaller boiler. And then your 150, 199 is going to be your large chassis or larger boiler. So between the two, the small chassis holds 1.02 gallons, your large chassis at 2.5 gallons. Capable of your flow rates, depending on the size, you go from a maximum flow rate of 4.8 gallons a minute in your 85 to 10.5 gallons a minute in a 199. With your heat onlys, you can use them either with the tank sensor, which comes shipped right with the boiler, or you can always use an aquastat, and you'll just tell the boiler right at startup that you're going to be using an on-off switch. They have increased in weight a little bit. So if you guys use the old ones, they are a little bit heavier to the new ones. So we always recommend team lift, but that 230-pound boiler for a larger combi can get quite large to get on the wall. So make sure you're safe when you're lifting those. Boiler's operating range, we've allowed you to go up to 180 degrees now for a central heating call. If you're running a domestic hot water call, it can give you upwards of 190 degree set point temperature. So we can really satisfy those indirect tanks a lot faster. It does have a fixed high limit of 210 degrees. Previously, you saw some altitude adjustments in the control. We no longer need to worry about that. We'll talk about altitude in a little bit later of a slide, but a little precursor to it, there is no altitude derate. Small chassis has a max allowable working pressure of 45, large chassis 60. They are only going to come with a 30 PSI relief valve. So if you do need to get to those higher pressures, shotgun houses, third, fourth story, things like that, just change out that relief valve and don't go over that max allowable. When we look at our turn down ratios, we have increased these, almost doubled them in some instances. With your 100 series, every model hitting a 10-to-1 turn down ratio. So this little 85 turning down all the way to 8.5, and your 199 turns down all the way to 19.9. It's going to help tremendously with short cycling, micro zones, things like that are just going to really give a whole boiler itself a longevity. Short cycling boilers are going to ruin those electrodes and things like that. So give a longer life to all the parts and pieces inside of them. For your 200 series, an 85 is a 10-to-1 turn down ratio. A 120 is actually a 14-to-1 turn down ratio. And then same 150, 10-to-1, and your 199 is a 14-to-1 turn down. So if you look at your cascade scenarios, two 199s cascaded together, you get a 28-to-1 turn down ratio. Very big things to look at. If you do run propane, because there is a higher calorific value in that propane fuel, coupled with the same low fan speed, you are going to raise that low end. And you're going to add about somewhere between 3,000 to 5,000 BTUs on the low end. Shrinks the turn down ever so slightly, but it is a little bit less if you're running on propane. For your small chassis, it's almost 34 by 18 by 20 inches deep. Your large chassis, just a little bit larger on height, same width, and your depth is actually only another 2 inches. So for small to large, it's not too much difference in size. Then you can see your weights here. That 150, 199 can be 179 or 190 pounds, so team lift. That 230 pound that we looked at previously would be a full shipping weight. Things that come in the box, this has changed a little bit. Used to get shipped with some brass tees and fittings and things that most everybody, it seems, that I've talked to across the nation have just not quite used them somewhere else. So no longer do you get all those fittings in the box, but you'll still get your outdoor sensor, that 30 PSI relief valve, pressure gauge that will go in a different location. We'll talk about 2 new boiler drains. All our boiler drains don't come with handles on them. That's just so only people that need to use the boiler drain use them. Always the wall bracket, tank sensor if you're using those heat onlys. You get the tech documentation. If you do a combi, you're going to get 150 PSI relief valve for that DHW side. Just looking at your local codes, if you got to add those extra expansion tanks, things like that, just make sure you check with your local codes on those. With your heat onlys, you're going to get these closure caps. This is if you're not using that 4-pipe connection on the bottom. Make sure you close off the 2 connections that would be for your indirect tank. They're going to be the 2 inside connections. Make sure you cap those off good and tight before you start filling the boiler. Otherwise, you're going to get some wet feet. This air supply cover that you're going to use in certain venting configurations, and you get a condensate discharge tube. If you look at the 200s, for any previous users of the 200, I just want to make a note that you will no longer get a low loss header sensor in with the boiler. You'd have to order that separately when you get that low loss header. When you unpack the box, first thing I always like to do is kind of almost get it in place. So with these added little wooden feet on the bottom of it, you can now stand the boiler completely upright. You're going to protect all your hydraulic connections. That condensate nipple, especially being plastic, we're not going to, chip that off right at the beginning of the job. But it also gives it a place so you can get your hands underneath it and actually pick the boiler up nice and easy. And then once you're done, you can just remove that. They're held in with a single screw, and remove those pieces of wood, or you could use it maybe to staple up your wiring, some conduit, something like that. The fittings on the bottom of the boiler have changed. So these no longer are going to sit there and spin around in those clipped in connections. These are robust. They're held in with 4 single screws, all NPT on the bottom of it. We have put these in. I put in a 100 in our mobile Vitomobile and did it with 1 pipe wrench. They don't move any longer. We always still recommend the backup wrench. You'll see there is still the hex up here for a backup, but you could use that with a 1 pipe wrench and almost not worry about it. Maybe that'll help you with the new guy that forgets about the backup. The 85-120, the gas has moved. It will be on the right-hand side now versus it previously being in the middle. So these are a little off of center or symmetric. In the 150-199, you'll see that gas valve moves back to the center. On your small chassis, 85-120s, 3/4 inch connections across the board. Large chassis, 1 inch connections, except for that gas is still remaining at that 3/4 inch. New location for your pressure gauge, especially on the 200. So it's no longer going to be down on the control. It's a full ported pressure gauge, just like you're used to for umpteen years in the field. That's just going to screw right into this NPT fitting here. Standard relief valve, 3/4 threaded on top. Make sure you do use those pipe dopes and Teflon that you're using to seal thread. This has a gasket on the bottom of it here, so it'll just slide all the way down into this copper pipe coming out of the top of the boiler. Throw the clip across it. This is exactly how all the fittings are inside of the boiler as well, so you'll see exactly what we're looking for. Slap that clip across it, and then it comes with a zip tie to make sure that that clip doesn't move, or if somebody bumps into it, it doesn't create any leaks. So we'll talk about the new controls. Again, we talked about it a little bit in the beginning, but it's the E3 end-to-end electronics. So in your 100, you're going to have a BCU. You'll find that on the left-hand side. As you look at the boiler, it's going to be right on the left-hand side. And that's going to be your burner control unit. This is where all of your flow switches, safeties, high limit sensors, this controls your burner modulation. So gas valves, things like that are controlled there. That's going to communicate to the top control here, which is your HMU or your heat management unit. That's going to control your pump relays. This will be where all of your field wiring is done for that outdoor sensor, tank sensor, things like that for your 100 series. And then built into the control panel itself, you'll have a TCU. It's a telemetric control unit, or fancy way to say that's the built-in Wi-Fi board. And on the front of this display, you'll find a 3.5-inch touch button. So these buttons are going to be just a touch button display for that 100 series. And then all those control boards are actually the same when we look at the 200. So same HMU, same BCU, same TCU. So if we had to repair those, replace them, not repair, if we had to replace them at any time, they are completely interchangeable between all 10 models that we're talking about today. You would just program that board on site to tell it which boiler it's going into. Now the upgrade from the 100 to the 200 is inside this center box here that houses your HMU. You're going to get this additional MZIO board. This is a multi-zone input-output. This is going to control your 3 pump relays. It has 3 thermostat connections. These 3 thermostat connections could also do a powered thermostat, like a Nest. So that traditional 24 volts and does have a common terminal. One thing of note, make sure you are hooking those up correctly. When you look at each one of these, zone 1 is the 2 outside pins will be your T and T or R and W, and that center pin is common. If you put them terminals 1 and 2 as opposed to 1 and 3, that will blow a fuse in the board. So make sure those are getting hooked up correctly. And it also gives you an upgraded display. So it's a 7-inch color touch display. This is going to have more advanced settings in it so that we can control this MZIO board. And we'll talk about this in a little bit more, but then again, same HMU, BCU, and TCU, all in those same locations. So fuel source, like I said, these come set up for natural gas, and during the commissioning process, it's just going to ask you if you're running on natural gas or propane. So we just want to look at some requirements, and then we always want to make sure we take some notes so we know if anything's really changed for any service points. But if we're running natural gas, 4 to 14 inches, that's your window for inlet pressure. We want to make sure that it doesn't drop below 4 inches and doesn't go above 14. But also you want to make sure that you're doing those whole house loads. So even LP 10 to 14 inches, so same, but that whole house load, make sure with everything on in the house, we don't drop below that 4 or 10 inches, depending on your fuel source. And also look at that ignition. Once this boiler ignites, you want to see really no less than a 1-inch pressure drop. If you see a really large pressure drop, it's a call we get a lot into our tech service department. Really large pressure drops, it happens. Propane tanks can get empty. Somebody missed a fill. But we're going to help out with that as much as possible when we talk about combustion control here. But new heat cell, we've updated the heat cell, so it's not brand new. It is going to be still that same inox radial heat exchanger we've had for a long time now, but we made some updates to it. So this rear, middle, and front plate are now made out of a stainless steel versus previously being aluminum. This stainless steel middle board is no longer removable. So this rear end is going to be a maintenance-free area. But we've updated the condensate as it comes into the back of the boiler now, and you'll see that it actually shoes into here. So as that condensate traipses down and runs off of it, actually rains down this backside, which kind of keeps washing it every time that unit is condensing. With the fan and gas valve combo that's been updated in the boiler, they're now one integrated unit. They are calibrated together because all of these boilers now have Lambda Pro Plus technology. So we had Lambda Pro in our previous 200 series. We've made some upgrades, specifically a new burner. This is a Matrix Pro Plus burner. And we've added this mass airflow sensor. This mass airflow sensor is going to actually read the density of air coming into the boiler so that we can ensure that we have correct combustion with that little bit of excess air to make sure that we have safe combustion. But just thing of note, they are not separable. The 85-120 is not separable at all. The larger units, although mechanically separable, are going to be replaced as a single unit. So make sure we are covering all of our components from any moisture during services. It's the #1 killer of components, that moisture. You'll see that mesh sock that we had on a lot of previous boilers. This was here for that really good flame stability, especially at low fire. Now we have this same one piece, but no longer have that mesh sock on it. This is laser cut with specific perforations on the boiler. This perforation on the burner itself is going to give us that same flame stability. And then when we look at that mass airflow sensor, we know that we're going to have correct combustion. So it gives us that larger turn down ratio and still maintaining that safe combustion. Shot of the burner as it's running inside the unit. So we've always had an igniter and a flame sensor in the 200s. You'll now see that there's a flame sensor installed on the 100s. This is for our Lambda Pro technology. For ignition and initial flame sense, you're looking at your igniter. So make sure during those services, we just have that proper gapping between the two here and the gapping from the burner up to the sensor, as well as the gapping from the burner to your flame sensor. But once this ignites, this will be our initial flame sense. So if any ignition failures, things like that out in service land, ignition failures are usually from, no gas, things like that. But if poof, everything runs right, you're looking at an igniter versus a flame sensor. Once the boiler ignites and the burner has good flame sense, it then looks at the flame sensor to take over for Lambda Pro Plus technology. So this flame sensor is sending the signal back to the control for where that flame signal is. And dependent upon some algorithms built into control, it'll actually know what the combustion of the boiler is. So Lambda Pro Plus, like what does it do? Well, we're going to adjust our fuel and air mixture independently to compensate for changing air and fuel qualities. Some of our competitors out there will talk about having some gas adaptive things, or everybody claims to have the same thing, but a lot of other ones are actually going to adjust their fan. So if there's no gas coming in behind it, the fan's just going to raise its RPM. We're going to adjust our air and fuel independently. So we'll open the gas valve more, leave the fan at the same RPM. All the things that you guys would do on site with your analyzers to get proper combustion, we're doing that for the length of the boiler's life through Lambda Pro every time the boiler operates. With that mass airflow sensor now installed in the boiler, we get altitude compensation. During the commissioning process, you will tell the boiler at what altitude you are. This is going to be Price is Right rules, as close to possible without going over your altitude. For every 100 meters in elevation change, the boiler will actually increase its fan speed 1% to equate for that lower density of air. This means that even at 10,000 plus feet, we have 0 derate. So for any of our guys that are out there, at any elevations, we don't need to oversize our boilers and do that standard derate, 1,000 BTUs over 4,000 feet. Just tell the boiler the altitude you're going into, and it will compensate for you. Once it knows its fuel source and the altitude it's looking at, it'll know what flame signal it's looking for. If it doesn't get that flame signal, it's going to assume at startup that you have a larger vent length, a longer vent length. So it's actually going to recognize that resistance in your airflow, and it's going to increase your fan speed. Does have some limitations. It'll only go up to 15% over where the nominal value is, but it's going to take care of those really long vent lengths, but that 15% is going to be maximum for the main longest lines of vent runs that we have, and we'll look at venting kind of towards the end. Now, all these things were done, within the first 20 minutes of the boiler being installed. It's overcome all of these things, so it'll know where to look for the rest of the life of the boiler. But during that time frame, if there's anything that happens to the wind or anything happens to the flame, it's going to a lot of times assume that there's wind blowing into the exhaust for any diminished flame signal. So it can actually run at part loads and has a new wind compensation feature into it. This will help tremendously for those lake houses, mountain houses where wind can come in from various directions, blow right down your exhaust and give you those nuisance lockouts for loss of flame. It'll just run at part load. It may short cycle because it's running at a little bit higher of a low fire, but I'd rather have a boiler short cycle than lock out on me. If there is anything that does go wrong with that mass airflow sensor, this can be cleaned. I don't know if there's anybody that works on their own car, but it would be very similar to cleaning one in a vehicle today. You're just going to use some electronics cleaner. Again, just be very sensitive to it. We don't want to break that off. But if there was an implausible range to it, because this is checked at every start, you will get an error code, but it doesn't lock the boiler out. It'll just turn the turn down ratio. So it's just going to go back to what Lambda Pro used to do previously with a 5-to-1 turn down ratio without the mass airflow sensor. So it just kind of reverts back to the previous version of Lambda Pro, and the boiler will still be 100% operational. So the hydraulic components. Want to talk about this for cross compatibility of components within the boiler. So flame sensor, igniter, you're going to have one flame sensor and one igniter for all 10 models. When we look at different heat exchanger for large chassis to small chassis, and then you'll have different hydraulic components. So if it's in a 120 or a 199 combi, you can see these are pretty vastly different. But your 85 and 120, whether it's in a 100 or a 200 heat only, is the same hydraulic assemblies. And that 150, 199, same hydraulic assemblies. So all of these parts are cross compatible within 4 boilers, and again 4 boilers here, and then single boilers here. The pumps are the same, small chassis, so that'll actually hit 5 models, and pumps large chassis 5 models. 3-way valve 5 models, and smaller chassis 3-way valve is 5 models. So we're trying to run through and do common parts initiative, so that stocking wholesalers, and if there's any wholesalers on the call, my apologies, my family's the same way as a wholesaler. We don't stock as many parts as we may have in the past, but not everybody uses an L8148, so it's very difficult for a wholesaler to stock that many components. So a lot of the times it goes down to the contractor to hold on to parts for boilers they install. So the less parts you have to carry that are more cross compatible throughout our entire portfolio, I think is a really good game changer for everybody involved. Specifically, when you look at the combi models, you'll see that there is going to be 2 different flow sensors. This is an upgraded flow sensor, so it's actually more of a turbine style. Everybody has great water until the water main breaks. So I'll leave it up to you guys for water quality out in the field, but I would recommend on any combi boilers, my habit is putting a pre-filter, just one of those cartridge whole house style filters, and just catch any debris or anything. We don't want that to get through the turbine, the flow restrictor that's going to be above the turbine, or then into the small passages of that braze plate to diminish flow and things like that. So not a requirement, but just food for thought on maybe a pre-filter, something the homeowner sees, they want to change it, they call you up. If you're changing the filter, you do that yearly maintenance, and might help get your foot in the door every year. We know they don't always call. But you're going to have a different flow sensor between the 120 and the 199 because plastic to brass body will be a separate pump, different braze plates. Your outlet temperature sensor is compatible in 120s and your 199s. And the diverter valve would be different between a 120 and a 199. So your combi models are quite different for that hydraulic assembly, but most every other components are interchangeable. When we look at the internal pumps, so this is in your 100, and again, remember that 200 now has an internal pump in our E-Series 200s, but that pump can also be changed. So 99% of the time, you're most likely going to be doing primary, secondary. So using that low loss header, maybe you're just going to a buffer tank, or maybe some closely spaced T's. But if you want to really start curtailing that delta T through the boiler itself to get some really good condensing out of it, you can change the pump curve. We will have a minimum 50% capacity. This is going to be so we hit that minimum flow rate to engage the flow switch that's inside the boiler. But they will be factory set at either between 75 and 100% is what the factory setting is on the pump curve. So if your primary loop's only running, in this setup here, 2.9 gallons a minute at, 6.2 gallons a minute at 2 foot ahead, 2.8 feet ahead, we can really drop that all the way down to about 60% pump curve. So we don't over pump our primary loop. We don't short cycle the boiler, things like that, that'll help you really get that fuel efficiency and overall boiler efficiency you're looking for. It's also possible to have different pump curves for the primary loop on a heat call, as well as if you direct connect that indirect tank, you could have a separate pump curve when it sees a domestic hot water call. So we could still jack that up to 100% for DHW and get that high volume and fast loading back to that indirect tank. So look at the control and the interface. So we have updated it. It's a more Vito pearl white. It's not quite as gray, although I guess this picture doesn't do it justice. It's a very bright white, and when you kind of twist it around in the light, you'll actually see almost like a diamond speckle to it. Looks very nice, seamless. I think it'll last. It'll be timeless. There is a light guide on it. We'll talk about. This light guide is going to be your catch you out of the peripheral of your eye. It's actually going to blink fast when there's an error code and stuff. And the uniform platform on controls. But this light guide, like I was saying, this will, when the boiler turns on, it just comes on and it's just going to stay at a steady brightness for a bit. When the control's there, but there's no call for heat, it will go through a kind of a breathing mode, as you can see here, where it just gets dimmer and brighter. When you push a button or change a parameter or anything, you will get a bleep out of it. In the 200, you actually will also get an audible tone. And when they're flashing, you have an error code or a fault code active. It'll just have a fast flash to it. So for that homeowner to get a quick look out of the peripheral, they can see it quite there. If you haven't seen this yet, both 100 and 200 are going to have an interchangeable display, so they can be moved from bottom to top. When you do that, the light guide is actually going to change. So the light guide is always going to be on the door side of the boiler. But I would say reading the directions might take you about 15 minutes the first time to do it. After that, probably 4 minutes to change the control from the bottom to the top. So even wall mount, I like putting the control at the top. It puts it up right in front of my face. I'm not crouching over. But especially in upstate New York, we have a lot of real short basements. I'm talking only 4 foot tall. So bringing that control all the way up to the top of it. So when you're sitting down on that 5-gallon bucket, it's a lot easier to program. A lot better than laying on your stomach like I've had to do in many basements. We took the screws out of the bottom of the boiler to get the door off, or the front of the boiler to get the door off. Sometimes these fell on the ground. For some reason, they always seem to find the floor drain when they're there. So wherever the control is located, so previously, if the control is on the bottom, these 2 square holes that are going to be on the bottom of the control, on the bottom of the boiler, That's when the control is at the bottom. If we move the control up to the top, these square holes are actually going to be on the top of the boiler coming down. So just take a screwdriver, a thermostat screwdriver, a pen works, keys work. You only have to insert about an inch, and you're just going to push up on a little release tab in the door, and then pull the door out towards you, and then lift up towards the ceiling. If you want to move where the control sits, or you want to take it out of your way for service, for wiring, things like that, there's two little tabs that you'll see on the top inside. So you just pull those towards you, and then kind of the control pops out a little bit, and then again, lift that up towards the ceiling. If you leave the control on the bottom, you do have a little what we call the service position, but you can kind of park the control up a little bit, keeps it off the ground for the wrench to fall on or somebody to step on, spill coffee on it. And you can leave it right on the boiler to still have access to your wiring down below. You could do the same thing if the control was on top. You just need to unplug the back of the control and just flip it over to get that to lock into its space correctly. On the bottom of the boiler, regardless of where the control is located, there is a toggle switch. So make sure that toggle switch is turned on. You'll see your 4-wire connections here for your toggle switch. And then a quick good shot inside of the HMU. This is where you're going to do your field wiring. Now, this purple plug here and this section to the right, this is on both a 100 and a 200. So you'll have outdoor sensor connections, tank sensor or aquastat connections, and call for heat connections. So both 100 and 200. Tank connection right here. So that 200, no longer trying to find those two little red spade connectors that are buried in a separate little back end of the unit. So it's all just in one little location to do your wiring. And you have 2 pump controls in your 100. Primary pump or recirculation pump for those indirect tanks, or a domestic hot water supply pump if that domestic is set up as its own zone. In your 200, you'll get the addition of this board here. This is that MZIO board we spoke about earlier. So you'll have those thermostat connections here for 3 thermostats, the corresponding pump relays over here, low loss header sensor, 0 to 10 volt input, 0 to 10 volt output. There's some safeties in here as well. And all of this entire control here has a new setup and is actually now gasketed. So when that control is closed in the boiler, it's gasketed to secure all of these controls from any moisture or water damage. Still make sure during your services that you put your plastic bags or trash bags over that to protect any electronic components from water. Always still good things to do regardless of the boiler. But if anything happens when you're not there, we're going to try and protect those control boards as best as possible. All these cable ductings are still in there. So these are your low voltage, already has that strain relief bushing in there. You do have 2 120 knockouts on the right side here, would be for these 2 pump relays. And you have 4 120 knockouts on this side for these 3 pump relays. These knockouts for your 120, you're actually only knocking out now is the plastic control. You're not actually taking the metal knockout of the chassis. So make sure you don't have to use a big hammer and a big screwdriver. You can pretty much almost break those out with your finger. That floor stand we talked about earlier. So if you're doing free floor standing, make sure you are securing that to the floor so that this doesn't have a chance of tipping over. The floor stand is going to be for your boiler. Make sure you do separately secure all of your piping, venting, gas lines, things of that nature. Don't let those just hang off the bottom of the boiler. Those will be good if you got some funny width studs. Some places up here have 24 on center houses. I wouldn't buy one, but they're out there. So I can't really, a little bit harder, but you could always build your wall. I know you guys all have various ways of doing things. And we do have these for those multi-boiler cascade setups, and you'd see a manifold across the bottom of it, which does that primary, secondary piping right for you. So we've been about an hour in here. I just want to stop and see if anybody has any questions. If there's no questions, still take a 5-minute break, grab a cup of coffee, go to the restroom. I have 10 of 12 or I'm East Coast. I have 10 of 12, but either way, we'll get back going here in about 5-7 minutes. And if you do have any questions or anything we've talked about already, make sure you hit that Q&A on the bottom of your screen, or maybe it's on the top of your screen. And there's also the chat window as well, if you have any questions coming through. So we had a question come in about, is there a 24-volt connection for an external low water cutoff? On the 200 boiler, there is a connection for a low water cutoff for an external safety. However, it's not going to power your low water cutoff. So it's just a connection for that dry contact end switch, whether it's opened or closed. But there's not a location to direct power one. So it would still need a secondary source. If you get a 120, give it its own power source. Make sure you have a dry contact coming back to the boiler. You could do it that way. And you could also change zone 1 for those thermostat connections on that MZIO board. Zone 1, during commissioning, you tell it it's a low water cutoff safety versus a thermostat connection. You could always still break incoming power as well. I like to run them as a dry contact, so we still have post purge, but you could always just kill power to the boiler as well. We had another one. Do you get a low loss header sensor, or is it not needed? The 100 does not have a place for a low loss header sensor. We would still obviously recommend going primary, secondary. But in the 200, there's a location to wire the low loss header sensor in. So still that number 2 sensor. It's not necessary to use it, but there is a location for it, but that would only be in a 200. And unlike previous models, it does not get shipped with the boiler. So if you're using that low loss header in a new install with a 200, you'd have to make sure you do ask your wholesaler for a low loss header sensor, a number 2 sensor. If it's a swap out and it already has the low loss header sensor, it's identical from previous to current. So you can reuse the low loss header sensor if one's already on site. And sound levels are a big differentiator. Do other boilers manufacturing list decibel ratings in the IOM like Viessmann? Having worked for other boiler manufacturers, this is the first company I've seen put in decibel ratings, which surprised me that a lot more European companies don't do so. As in Europe, they are installed pretty much in their kitchens most of the time. It looks like it's a kitchen cabinet. But ours have a maximum decibel rating. I believe it was 38 or 39 decibels. It's quieter than a standard conversation. I believe it was the 150 was 39, the 199 is like 38 decibels. Your 85s and 120s are low 30s, much quieter than any standard conversation that somebody might have. A little bit higher than 39, 31 to 56 would be decibel on the highest one, 56, but still under your conversation threshold is usually about 60. So it's been 5 minutes. We'll get moving on here. Again, don't forget that Q&A if you got any questions at all. So I'd like to take a minute to talk about digital tools. So as I talked about in slide 3, with that built-in Wi-Fi is going to come, it's a whole digital ecosphere and things for some of our past customers. You may have already used vCare. That's still available. It has gotten a facelift, and it's now kind of built into the boilers. They'll still have to download that app to use it, but now everything's in there. But when we talk about digital tools and kind of where the future of digital tools and the whole ecosphere is going, is we have come up with a Viessmann account. Now, some of you may already have a Viessmann account. This would be called a business partner account. If you do have a business partner account, that gives you a company number. I think it's a 9-digit number, usually starts with the letter 8. If you already have that business partner account, you're just going to send a simple email to new_accounts@viessmann.com and just say, I want a Viessmann account. You could also just go to account.viessmann.com and you can register for account that way. Or you could go through the Veto Guide app that we'll talk about here in a moment, and that'll have a link to register you for a Viessmann account. A Viessmann account is free. There's no costs associated with it. Now, like most everybody else, there are going to be in-app purchases is the best way for me to explain it. Some of these things are used on your laptops, PCs, desktops, and some of these are going to be a native app, something that's downloaded right on that smart device, whether you guys are using iPads or Android tablets or just your smartphones or something like that. But anything that was a previous Viessmann app or something of that nature that's been out there in the past, those are actually going to get all migrated into a Viessmann account. So again, simple, easy to get signed up. Get in touch with your Viessmann rep or Hurley Engineering, any of those sales reps of Viessmann, and they can help you get signed up for one. And then from there, it's a very simple process. So the main account is set up for the owner or a managing partner of the business, somebody who makes financial decisions for the business. And then underneath them, they'll send out a request to you personally for you to be a member of their Viessmann account, and then you get your own Viessmann account. Just helps them organize their own business. So if somebody retires, moves on to a different profession or something like that, they can keep you on or get rid of you on their Viessmann account if they don't need you any longer. But within that Viessmann account, you're going to get different tools. First one we're going to talk about is vPlan. Now, vPlan is a tool that's going to be used by sales estimators, system designers, installers, sales reps. Our Viessmann staff are going to be using this. So a lot of our engineering staff that helps with designs, especially on these larger cascade jobs. You could have your local sales rep, or Hurley Engineering does an excellent job. So if you want to invite those guys into these plans, you can do that. And then when you're kind of done with their knowledge and you're ready to go, you can kind of get rid of them. This is not going to take over anything that you would use for your heat loss calculations. So you still want to go out and do those traditional manual J's, however you guys are doing that. I'm not here to tell you a different way to do so. So still sizing your equipment, how you guys have done it in years past. But once you have that information, vPlan is going to be a place where you can go in and log in your existing system, so that you can go and compare that to a new system, so you can sit down and do a design later. Maybe you have a really good service technician, but maybe they're not the best as a design. Sorry, a chat came in, and I've said Hurley Engineering, and I've been not talking about Flow Tech, and I apologize. Don't forget your Flow Tech as well. Flow Tech reps, along with Hurley and our Viessmann staff as well. So maybe you have a technician that's the best service guy and installer, but maybe not quite a designer yet, and he wants to learn about it. if he determines that we're doing a boiler install or a boiler swap out because it's just too far gone, let's get a new one in there, he can get you all the information that you might need to do a heat loss, as well as design the entire system, saving multiple trips to a job, speeding up the design and optimizing everything as it goes along. You can also bring in your wholesalers or your, again, your Hurley or Flowtech reps to have them be part of that design as well. If you need parts ordered, they can see that design and see what boiler you're using. Do you need a low loss header? Does that come with a sensor? They'll see all the parts and pieces that you need to order, indirect tank possibly. But once you build all that design in there, at the same time, you're telling all of the information that's needed so that when you go on to the job site after install and you're doing that startup, all of those single inputs are going to create many outputs. So you're going to get a wiring diagram that's printed out. You'll get a piping diagram that's laid out. All of this information is also a lot of the questions that you'll get asked during the commissioning. So you'll have already pre-populated what your altitude is, what fuel source you're using. Does it have an indirect tank or not? Maybe it's a combi. All of these things are already pre-programmed in this design plan. And then when you're on site, you use your VitoGuide app, which is going to be downloaded on your smartphone or smart device, could be a tablet. And you can use this and do what we call one-click commissioning. So since you've already designed that, you just go into your VitoGuide and you pull up Mrs. Smith's house. It's ready for commissioning. You connect to the boiler and all of that information is automatically uploaded to that boiler. All parameters change, everything's done so that that boiler is installed and commissioned exactly how it was designed and meant for. Also, there's going to be guided spare parts replacement. So remember that control is going to be good for 10 different models right now, and it's going to move into more as we start doing these upgrades to other model boilers. That'll take you through your VitoGuide app where you go through and actually program that control board for that specific boiler. There'll also be a service layer built into it. That service layer is going to be within a 200 control, and it does help you do some certain things. This service layer for a 200 is going to be used for your cascade setup. So if anybody out there, any commercial guys out there, if you're doing cascade and you want to use the new 200, using VitoGuide is actually the only way to set up a cascade. But that has kind of a service layer built into it as well. So this is how you're going to commission to the boiler while you're on site. After the boiler's been commissioned, you're going to want to have the homeowner download vCare, or during the commissioning process, you actually, if the homeowner gives you their Wi-Fi, their router address or the name of their Wi-Fi and their password, you can actually set up the Wi-Fi for them, and then you send them an invite to download vCare. Once they download vCare, their boiler is already connected to their Wi-Fi. They connect right to it. And then you're not waiting for a Nest thermostat to say your house has dropped 5 degrees, something's going on. This will give you an immediate notification that the boiler is out on fault code, what the fault code is, and then it'll also populate a screen that says call Bob's Plumbing, whatever, Bob's Boiler Works, whatever the name of your company is. You put that information in during commissioning, and it'll tell you to call them with their phone number. If you also ask for permission, you as the contractor can gain access to remote monitor the boiler as well. They'll get a notification in their vCare app to allow Bob's Boiler Works permission to remote monitor the boiler. And then as soon as the homeowner gets that fault code notification, you will also get an email notification, which will help take away from the nuisance 2 a.m. calls because an outdoor sensor is broken, or something that's not a no heat call. You can wait 2 hours before it's 6 a.m. and go there when you start up. schedule it so you meet them there when they get right out of work. You're sitting there waiting in their driveway, and you already know what the problem is. You're not going into it blind. You can stop at that wholesaler, grab those parts and pieces if you have to drive by it on your way to the job site, and just save time and money without any external controls. So VitoGuide web. So you have VitoGuide mobile, which is on your cell phone itself. It's an app you download that's live, ready to go. You can download it right now. And then there's VitoGuide web. VitoGuide web is kind of the same application. This is where you're going to do that remote monitoring of those boilers. Commercial end users are going to use a VitoGuide web. They can actually kind of almost take over a full building management system of just their boilers, and they can see how a whole plant is operating in a cascade scenario. That would require to do more. There are in-app purchases to do more or less through VitoGuide. There is availability to remote change outdoor curves, per boiler. If you have somebody that wants more control than other users, you could put a VitoGuide Pro edition on theirs, which allows you to change a numerous amount of parameters remotely. And then the most base one that's free just allows you kind of some just read parameters, and you should be able to change an outdoor curve as well. Question came in just to kind of roll this all out is, will there be an issue if there's no Wi-Fi or cellular access during the boiler commissioning? So to communicate to the boiler, it's if you're just doing a standard commissioning, the boiler itself produces its own hotspot to connect to your smart device. So if you don't have cell signal or there's no Wi-Fi, so say it's a new construction, you can still connect to the boiler with your VitoGuide app on site with no cell service, no Wi-Fi, and do everything you need to do. The nice thing about using the VitoGuide app is at the end of the commissioning process is it will produce a commissioning report. That report can then be sent to your service manager, just put in your files. I know there's probably guys out there that are one-man show. Put those just in your files. You can send them to your service manager, design manager, things like that. Then after the fact, you can go back and set the boiler up for permanent Wi-Fi access at really any time after the fact, or change it. You get a new router, homeowner changes, they sell the house, you can just get all that stuff changed over afterwards. So there's a lot of possibilities because the boiler has two different Wi-Fis. Has its own personal hotspot to connect to you, the contractor. Then it also has a separate Wi-Fi board built into the same control that will connect to your permanent Wi-Fi whenever you see fit for it. And again, all these questions that are coming in, they will be repeated. If anybody wasn't here in the beginning, I will send to all attendees with their email address every question with all pertinent answers on it. So make sure you ask your questions. Again, even if I don't know the answer, we'll get those information for you. Now, if you've used any of our previous boilers, this isn't really going to be anything new except for the size. But all of our boilers do come set up for a coaxial. Not all of them. Let me reiterate. Our residential boilers we're talking about today are going to come set up for a coaxial. Some people call it concentric vent. That's going to have that polypropylene inner with that like powder coated aluminum outer pipe. We do have our own, but whoever's your local wholesaler selling, whether that be a Centrotherm, a Duravent, maybe that Z-Flex, their Z-Dens line, Cox Keelan from us. There's many manufacturers out there that polypropylene, as long as it meets national ULCS 636 or UL 1738. There's also direct vent and two pipe, so that's polypropylene, CPVC, or stainless steel. Single pipe, again, poly, CPVC, or stainless steel, and you can use flexible vent polypropylene. Again, make sure that's vertical only, and you don't want that on too much of an angle with those funny chimneys. they can get too angled and hold water. That might not create enough restriction to cause an issue with the boiler operating, but having that acidic water sit in that corner for so long, I've actually seen it eat away at polypropylene over the years. So just be careful of those. Notice one thing you won't see here, and that is PVC. So PVC is not a venting material for any Viessmann product. PVC shouldn't be a venting material in my eyes for anybody, but I can see where it's used. If you are using a direct vent, so that means two pipe, exhaust, and air intake, your air intake in this scenario could be used for in PVC, but that's the only option you're going to use PVC for is air intake. Now we have updated it, so you'll see here that it is now going to be a 3-inch takeoff. So this 3-inch, these have notes on them. One is saying you got to drop down for 2-inch, or you got to increase for 4-inch. So it's a 3-inch takeoff now on the top of the boiler, but you still do have 2-inch capability in those smaller 85 120s like we had in the past. You can go 98 feet in those 2-pipe direct vent or single vent applications. Staying with 3-inch, you get 164 feet or 98 feet in your large chassis. No 2-inch on that large chassis. And then if you move up to 4-inch, you can go upwards of 198 feet with your vent. Hopefully we're not going that far with our vent lengths, using those sparingly, I hope. I would move the boiler before I vented 200 feet, but I guess there's got to be a place where you're going to need that length. And with that large chassis, you get a max 148 feet in a 4-inch vent. If you stay with the coaxial it comes in with, again, that's going to be an 80-125 or 3x5-inch. Max equivalent 98 feet or 33 feet on that large chassis. 43 feet for your smaller chassis in a 2-inch or a 60x100. And if you move up to a 4-inch poly or a 4x6-inch, 100x150, you get 118 feet or 43 feet for that large chassis. So we can still a lot of length on those flue runs. We've updated your air intake. So now all 10 of these models we're talking about today has a secondary air inlet, which means we can take our air in from the left or the right-hand side. So it'll make piping those retrofits much easier. If you're switching, especially name brands, they might be on the different side, and nobody likes funny looking piping, especially not me. My father still calls me a fashion plumber. But I just want to take note, it is very, very visible to the naked eye. One is a 3-inch knockout. So when you peel this inner out of it, one's 3-inch and one is 3.5-inch. One 3.5-inch one's going to be for your CPVC or PVC, and the 3-inch one for polypropylene. Depending on which side, these are the same OD, same outer diameter, so they can be swapped. And then this air inlet cover, that's going to be used when you're doing that direct vent 2-pipe. If you're just doing room air dependent, I would take your fresh air in by just leaving this donut gasket off. This way your air inlet comes in from the top. It's a little bit elevated from the top of the boiler. Take the installation manual or the venting manual, you throw that up on top of the boiler, and you can cover off this hole and choke the boiler's intake air down. I've done it in the past, set my coffee on top of the boiler and then knocked it over, and it fell right into this hole. It ruined an inducer fan, ruined my week's pay. So I would just recommend learn from my mistakes and just leave this air donut off. Plenty of room there for that incoming air to come in. If you're doing any cascade and you want to use a common vent system, there is going to be use of a check valve. We're still waiting for these check valves to get off of that boat in the, they're on the boats out in the ocean right now. Ours will actually slide right up inside of that polypropylene, so it'll help you from increasing that vent height before you can 90 out. But if you need one going in today, Duravent, Centrotherm, they all make one that would work for it as well. But it would require that secondary check valve on top of the boiler for any common vent systems. With that check valve installed, you will tell the boiler, this is on a 200 series only, you will tell that boiler that it is in a common vented system. that will increase the low fire fan speed so it can still open the check valve flapper. So that does shrink that turn down just a little bit if you're going into those. When we look at applications, your 100 series is going to be a single use boiler. So anywhere from 85 to 199,000. So homes, condos, apartments, townhouses, anything requiring that traditional DHW with indirect tank. That 85 goes all the way down to 8,500 BTUs. So we can get in some of those a lot smaller homes. Maybe not quite the tiny home community yet, but we'll work on that. We can turn down the top end of the boiler. So let's say we put in 150,000 BTU boiler because I want 150 to satisfy my indirect tank, but the house only needs 100,000 BTUs. You can change a parameter and say during a heating call, max firing rate 100,000. During a DHW call, max firing rate is 150. So you can really load match those pumps to your systems and do the best you can to get as maximum amount of fuel savings to the homeowner as possible. With your combi applications, that 120 is capable of 3.3 gallons a minute on the combi side for that domestic hot water. And I apologize, I do have a typo here. It is actually 4.7 gallons a minute. Must have been going a little fast. So 4.7 gallons a minute on the 199. Those are both at a 77-degree rise. Be careful with some of our competitors. I know quite a few of them out there say they have 5.2, 5.3 gallons a minute, and those are at a 70-degree rise. We will label all of ours at that traditional and standard 77-degree rise. Just one thing, a note with combis, they're great in every, not every application, but I know we sell a ton of them. So I'm not going to tell you where to not put a combi, and I won't tell you where to put a combi. But I've had issues with putting 199 sized combis in smaller houses, getting that DHW demand, but then the boiler's too large for the house, so it short cycles and I don't get quite the fuel savings I was looking for. So just make sure if you are sizing for DHW with combis, there could potentially be a trade-off for that central heating side. So just take those into consideration when you're having that conversation with the homeowner. And nowadays I've walked into homeowners' houses and they already tell you what they want put in their house before you can have a conversation with them. So we know they're all out there, but when it comes to DHW, we're going to stick to the 100s here kind of for application and commissioning, and then we'll show you the subtle differences with the 200. But this will be for both 100 and 200. With those heat onlys, there is going to be a priority timing, and then there's also a downtime, a retry time. So factory default is we do have priority set up for a DHW call with an aquastat or with a sensor. This is when you're piping with a 4-pipe. So this direct connect to the boiler or to the indirect and boiler. So with that priority setup, direct from the factory, you're going to get a 60-minute priority time. After 60 minutes, the 3-way valve is going to divert back and it's going to go back to a heating call. It's also not going to go back into a priority timing for a minimum of 60 minutes. So you're going to have an hour on and an hour off. If you have your priority timing set on, it can be adjusted from 1 minute all the way up to 4 hours. That will give you a minimum of 60-minute retry time to heat the house. It's a really good feature to have on to make sure that I've seen hot water lines break and then the house freezes up because the boiler just ran for DHW the whole time. So having this is really good for making sure the house doesn't go into any conditions. That will not apply to combi boilers. Once a combi boiler sees a demand for hot water, it will make hot water until it no longer sees a demand. There is no priority timeout on combi boilers. So if you're just doing, for 100 applications, Sometimes you're going to have to go to third-party controls, multi-zone controllers, whether you're doing pumps or zone valves, really anything over one system pump, we're going to need that secondary system control. If you want to daisy chain some zone valves, like we've done in days past, just make sure that it is a dry contact. Coming back to this number 96 plug, this is our call for heat. Make sure there's no voltage coming from your zone valves back there, because there is a little bit of voltage coming out of this, not a traditional 24, but it will blow a fuse in the control board itself. So you can daisy chain it, or I like better yet, just using these third-party controls. It makes diagnosing wiring so much faster in the future. If you're doing multi-pumps, we're going to force your hand to a third-party control, because the boiler, as you'll see here, for that multi-zone single system pump, we can control that right from the boiler. There is a relay for that. We can also do a recirc pump for that indirect tank. Let's say in this application, that indirect tank was set up here with a zone valve and you wanted a separate loading pump on it. You could configure this to be a supply pump. So if you had this zone valve configuration with 2 pumps, you could control both of those from the boiler. Otherwise, just traditionally a recirc pump, and it won't do anything in the combis. If you're doing multi-pumps, again, forcing you to that third-party control, where you're just going to have that isolated end switch, your XX, TT, coming back to that plug 96. Excuse me. So commissioning the boiler, there is going to be 2 ways to commission the boiler. You can do it always, just do it right from the screen of the boiler. So, maybe you're a guy out there, a girl out there, and you don't want to use the smartphone. Maybe you're still a flip phone guy and you just don't have it. You can always still do everything through the HMI, or that human machine interface. The additional things you get when using your VitoGuide app to commission the boiler is you're going to get that commissioning report, and you can also get certain things like when you're changing your outdoor curve. It's not just going to be looking at numbers and a small chart in the book. You're actually going to see that full graph on your phone to adjust it accordingly and then get that graph feedback from it. If you're going to use the app, you have to use, first thing that pops up is language. So I know in the past, if anybody's out there in the past and you had to convert controls from German to English when you started them up, I remember those days. You had to learn 5 words of German to do it. You remembered them. But now the first thing it asks you is English, French, Canadian, or Spanish. Nice thing for any barriers, like any language barriers. Let's say you're a tech and your native language is Spanish, but the homeowner is English speaking. You could use your phone in Spanish to commission the boiler, but leave the boiler in English. Also vice versa, homeowner Spanish, French, Canadian, and you speak English, you could do all of your stuff in English and then leave the boiler's display in their native language. So it really helps with that barrier of language that we can really see out there sometimes. But once you select the language, then asks you, do you want to use the app to commission it, or do you want to use it with the programming unit or the display? If you use the app, it'll then tell you to follow online instructions in the app, and that's when it starts producing that local area network or its own built-in hotspot for your phone to connect to. So otherwise, you just go through and it'll ask you Celsius, Fahrenheit. Do you want to do the filling and venting or purging? This is to help you vent or purge the air out of the system. So filling will leave the 3-way valve in a center position. So as you're opening that pressure reducing valve, or if you put in our boiler drains and you're force feeding into the boiler, either which way, you get your 3-way valve in a center position, and that internal pump's going to turn on and off, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. And then purging is going to be essentially the same thing, except we're going to fully divert the 3-way valve into heating and then fully divert the 3-way valve to DHW. This will help you get the full force of the pump behind you to help you completely purge each system in each zone of air. It'll ask you gas type, natural gas or propane. Simply use the arrow keys, go down, check mark to move forward. If you think that you answered anything incorrectly during this commissioning setup, this commissioning assistant, this menu button here on the left will actually go back a screen. And then in the future as well, this will also be menu and your back button once it's fully commissioned. Here's that altitude we spoke about. Remember, this is going to be Price is Right rules. This will be 100-foot increments if you're in Fahrenheit, or it'll be Fahrenheit and feet, or it will be in 100-meter increments if you're in the metric system versus imperial. It'll ask you if you want to carry out further configurations. A combi boiler, maybe you do, maybe you don't need to. I would always say yes. You can always just hit the check mark and not change anything. But if you're using those heat onlys, this is where you're going to find that it has domestic hot water. It has that indirect tank. Is it using a sensor or an aquastat? Those kind of questions. This is also additional configurations. If you're doing outdoor curves, this is also where you'd go to change that outdoor curve itself before initial setup. If you do it with the app, it's going to be, you can see start filling here and then start the venting process. And then all the rest of these questions are just in one screen now with the app, which I kind of see as nice, you know, date and time. You got that imperial or metric, fuel type. This is where you'd put in your contractor details. Again, you'd put in that Bob's Plumbing address, phone number, email address, and then that way that's stored in the boiler. If you just use the HMI, there's no way to put that contractor detail kind of in the coding of the boiler. And if you took over a job from somebody, say you bought somebody's company out, you can simply go back to this boiler, you just recommission it and update that contractor details to your own. So very simple to update it if you want in the future, or, you know, even if somebody sells a house and it's your buddy's house now, they want you to come over and it's somebody else's name in there. All sorts of things can happen. So when it's connecting, I just want to, if you're going to use the app to commission the boiler, I just want to point out some things that when you open your app on your phone, you're going to select, commission a 100 or commission a 200. There's two different options. With either one of them, it's going to get to a screen where it's going to say scan the QR code. Now on the boiler itself, on the display board, which is packaged separately, comes in the box as you get it, but the control is in its own separate box. When you open that control, there's going to be a QR code on the back of it that has a Wi-Fi signal. There's also 3 additional stickers with that same Wi-Fi information. I mean, that's got your security password, the Wi-Fi, it's got everything that you need to connect to this boiler. You're going to need that for your V-Care setup. The homeowner is going to need to get to that. You're going to need to use that in the future. You're going to need to use it during commissioning, and you need the control put onto the boiler to do it. So make sure you pull out those 3 extra stickers. I've seen my friends in Europe, they put it right on the control face. I probably wouldn't put it right on the display face. I put mine right on the side of the boiler where it's easily accessible, right by the rating tag. So you can see all of the QR codes that are on the side of the boiler. But you want to make sure that you hit, with app, it'll say pairing mode is activated. Please wait. Make sure you wait until this says it's ready to connect, the boiler's ready, so that the boiler's pushing out that Bluetooth, that local area network, a hotspot. There's many, it's technically a Wi-Fi local area network, but we'll call it a hotspot. Make sure that this is producing its hotspot, then tell your phone to scan the QR code and start looking for that hotspot. If the phone's looking for the hotspot before the boiler produces it, a lot of times they don't connect. So it's been a call. I just want to iterate that. Make sure the boiler is producing the hotspot before the phone looks for it. Some of those further settings that I was talking about, is it weather compensated with outdoor temperature sensor, or you could just say constant set point with room temperature controller. That would, now you can do fixed set point. You don't have to always have the outdoor sensor connected. Sometimes if you wanted just fixed set point, we'd have you wire an outdoor sensor in, throw it inside the cabinet. Then you'd have to flatten the curve. Viessmann's been flattening the curve long before COVID. Maintenance intervals, whether it's on burner runtime for those 200s or just maintenance months, 6, 12, 18, 24 would be your options there. You get those DHW things we spoke about with Aquastat. Is it an Aquastat and you want to use your circulation pump for a loading pump? Otherwise, it would say recirc pump. So a lot of good options and things to look at. And it's just going through and asking you those same questions as you go through. So it's not a startup wizard. It's a full commissioning assistant. They're just asking you questions and you answer them, and we'll get the boiler commissioned with ease. After it's all set up, these are going to be your 4 what we call dashboards now. So this would be the main display. So if you hit the up or down arrow, these are the 4 screens it would go through. This is going to be your main screen. If you turn the power off and on, this is going to be your display. Otherwise, I believe it might stay at what screen you leave it at. But you'll see here, you know, what's the temperature of your supply sensor? What's the set point of that temperature? Is the burner operating, and what modulation point? Wi-Fi. So this is saying that hotspot or that access point is on right now. Otherwise, it would say connected with your, router name. DHW. This display is going to be for a combi. It'll just say it's on or off and what the set temperature is. And then you'll see a burner modulation on this screen. If you use an Aquastat to command an indirect tank, or there is no indirect tank connected to a heat-only boiler, you will not have this entire tile. You'll only have 3 main screens. So you'll have to go into some service settings to see, is there a demand for DHW, but this whole screen is lost if there's no indirect tank connected, or if you're using an Aquastat. So I just don't want you to worry about that if you got one set up there and you get one set up in the future and that screen's gone. If there's no DHW hooked up for those heat onlys, not only do you lose this screen, but you'll lose all DHW parameters as well. Since you don't have DHW, there's no reason to see them, change them, access them. There's no reason to be in there. So the control will just hide all that stuff from you. If you want to add an indirect later, you just go back through the commissioning process that we just went over. It takes about 2 seconds. It's like 4 clicks to get the boiler back to the beginning of that commissioning process. And you'll just tell it has an indirect tank. You've added the sensor, and then you'll get this screen, you'll get the coding, and the parameters will open up to you. And with that outdoor sensor hooked up, you'll get your outdoor temperature. If it's fixed set point and no outdoor temperature, you again won't have this whole screen. So no outdoor sensor, no indirect tank, you'll only get these 2 main screens. With those main screens, you'll see this is the dashboards that we just talked about. Those are the 4 dashboards you could get. But once you hit menu, these will be the options. So you could turn DHW on or off. You could go into DHW settings, time programs with those indirect tanks, Wi-Fi, give you the Wi-Fi status. So nice to go in there and see, like, I can't connect to it through my VCare app. And you could see that, oh, I'm only getting a 12% Wi-Fi signal. Maybe add an extender, maybe go to a mesh network like I had to do at my house. It's all concrete, so it's hard to get a signal when you move rooms. You'll be able to input gas consumption. So you'll put in that calorific value and your calorific factor. And you can also put in your electricity, so how much you're paying per kilowatt and stuff. And you'll be able to read that information on their VCare app. They'll see how much the new boiler is actually costing them, what their use is. It'll be good for case studies. You as the contractor, if you have remote monitoring permission from the homeowner to that boiler, you'll also be able to see that gas consumption. So nice sales tool. Maybe you're in a cookie cutter community. You can go show the neighbor who called you in, I've saved Mrs. Smith 30%, every month for the last 2 years. We can do the same for you. And you can actually have the the proof's in the pudding. You can actually show that you have that availability and you're not just saying it as a sales tactic. Multiple information, boiler information, is the burner on, what position is the pump on, three-way valve positioning, all sorts of information is in there. You'll be able to pull up and see contractor information if you want to see it off the display. Then you can go into your settings, and then even deeper, you get into your service. This is where you get into your parameter levels. But you can go through and change a bunch of stuff. I think it's a much easier navigation for the 100 and the 200. It's going to be very similar to operating a smartphone or a smart device now. It's just very intuitive. So that'll kind of round out applications for the 100 as well as the commissioning process. So it is, I think, kind of a lot to process. So I want to take 5 minutes here. If there's any questions about the 100 before we move into a 200, and see if there's any questions that popped up or anything that you want me to further explain on those. I'll just give it a minute or two here and see if any questions kind of pop in. Well, I don't see anything coming in, so we'll just get moving. So 200 applications. Now, a 200 can be used as that standalone single-use boiler. So kind of almost the same applications we saw for the 100 heat only, small homes, condos, apartments, just anything really you can think. But the 200 is going to have a lot more outputs right out of the boiler. So these 4 pumps here could all be driven by the boiler itself. So there's no need for any third-party control. There's a lot more options in your 200, but you could also cascade these together. And when you cascade these and you want to get into large homes, commercial projects, hotels, full condo units, full apartment units, you can do this currently right now with the 199s. You can pair 15 199s together, which a grand total of 2,985,000 BTU input, with no other additional controls, just piping right into the. We spoke a little bit earlier about those heat circuits. So that heat circuit, or the European way of kind of controlling a home, is to use a heat circuit. This is going to be paired with these ADIOs, which is an analog digital input output. It's full communicating. These are available in mixer modules. So this will actually operate a system pump for that zone, its own 120 volt mixing valve. It'll read the outdoor temperature. It has its own curve. It will constantly circulate water and change the temperature of that water based on outdoor. This you can actually use and set up without any thermostats in a house. You could pair it with this Vitodens. This is going to be a room control for those same heat circuits. It's generally a thermostat, but it does actually a lot more. It's more of a room feedback sensor. So you could pair this, but it's not necessary with that. You could also do it in a pump control for any high heat circuits, high temp circuits, DHW recircs, and there is additional solar controls. This is an expansion module. So if you have to go over 4 of these, you have to add an expansion module to put in, 4 more. For any of those back nets or any BMS, BAS, any of those building management systems, again, whether you're going to use Modbus or traditionally BACnet, anything that's real old MSTP, we can still do as well. That would require a specific Wago gateway. So there is a specific one for BACnet, a specific one for Modbus, and then we'd have to use an MSTP router to get to Modbus, and then we'd communicate Modbus back to the boiler. So there is 3 different Wago gateways. If anybody out there is doing any commercial jobs with any BMS integration, And again, we're using these mixer modules or pump modules to expand the controllability of the 200 control and get full communicating room feedback. I live in upstate New York. It's 1,600 square foot, and I got 4 zones, and I have no thermostats in my house. I just use 4 of these mixer modules. It's a ranch. It's all staple up in floor, and it works tremendously well. You just give it an outdoor curve, play with it a little bit. Hopefully, if I can get this new 200 installed in my house, this has a new feature on it so that if that room you want it at 68 degrees and it's 66, you just tell the boiler to give it a 2-degree room compensation factor, and it'll actually adjust that outdoor curve for you, versus with our previous models, you got to kind of be a little finicky and adjust those curves on your own. Now with the 200, I mean, you can set up, say there's already a third-party control and you're running that initial 4-zone valve system. You can go over to zone 1 and run that system pump. That'll leave you 2 open zones, 2 open pump controls in here. Say you're waiting for an addition to happen. You want to add a single zone, 2 zones. You don't want to put in another third-party control. That could be built right into the boiler. This will have low loss header sensors, outdoor sensor, tank sensor. You got a recirculation pump. So there's going to be a lot more capability with your 200 control. This would be if you're using those mixer modules, you'd actually wire that. This is called a number 74 plug. This uses plus bus to expand these. Previously, we had KMK bus. If anybody out there is familiar with our old stuff, any of those like LAN cards and coding cards and that LAN communication, all that stuff's going to be a thing of the past. So they're not going to be compatible with the new boilers. So we'd have to go to a plus bus, which is still a 2-wire communication. And it'll help you with those mixer modules. If you do want to upgrade any old mixer modules, you would just have to upgrade the control board. All of these extra components, mixer, valve, pumps, and zone temperature sensors are all going to be identical. So you just have to update just the control. If you're doing any cascade scenarios with it, there is going to be this number 91 plug. This is where you're going to start your cascade communication. So that's that 3-wire, 18 gauge shielded. And there's going to be a dip switch right to the right of it. So this is using CAN bus communication. CAN bus is end to end, or end of line termination is what they call it. So it needs to know the first boiler and the last boiler. So we just need to turn those 2 dip switches on and leave every middle boiler in an off position so it knows first stop to last stop, and then it'll fully communicate between them. To commission the 200, it's going to be virtually the same, except our display on the 200 is a little bit different, and we're going to have more options and more functionality because of those mixer modules, those extra pump zones and thermostat connections. You can still do it through the VitoGuide app. Remember, those give you that commissioning report at the end of it. With the 200, with this full touchscreen display, this will actually show you the graph of your outdoor. So you don't, you can get that through the HMI, or you get it through your VitoGuide app. But remember, that commissioning report is just a really nice bookend to your job. It'll also help you if you have that commissioning report and you know exactly how it was set up day 1. Mr. Taillight Guarantee comes in the next 2 years, changes parameters, the boiler doesn't work right anymore. You can come back in behind that to fix it, and you have all that born on information stored right in your VitoGuide, right in that Viessmann account. But you'll select language and then application. This is going to be single device, lead device, or lag device. This is going to be obviously for those cascade setups. If it's a lag device, you'll then change this from 2 to 15. Lead device, this will only available device ID is going to be 1, or just leave it as single if it's just a single point appliance. And then again, it goes through and uses all of the questions that are going to come through like we saw before, your fuel type, This flue system, this is either going to be a single connection, single boiler, or common vented. So that'll be that multi-boiler connection. If you change this to multi-boiler, remember you're going to increase that low fire fan speed, effectively just shrinking that turn down a little bit. Otherwise, it's going to be extremely similar to the 100. So you start through that filling process, the venting process, same rules apply. Or you have that same basic configurations where you just go through the screen and get the same information you could also get on the HMI. If you're using the VitoGuide app or your VitoGuide mobile, same thing. You want to make sure that if you're commissioning with the software tool, your app, that you hit the check mark, and then once it says please follow the instructions, then the boiler is, again, same thing with the 200. We want to make sure it's pushing out that hotspot so your phone can find it. If your phone's looking for it before the boiler puts it out, sometimes it has a difficult time connecting. And then you get into a lot of additional controls, and maybe you guys are out there using them, maybe you're not. But those heating circuits I've been talking about, those are those additional mixer modules or pump modules. They're either not applicable or they're there. So you could set those up through these system schematics. Low loss header sensor. Do you have one? The heat zones, these are those thermostat, 3 thermostat heat zones. So are they a thermostat? Or I did answer that question earlier. If you want to use that thermostat connection as a dry contact for low water cutoff protection, you could use heat zone 2 as a low gas pressure and heat zone 3 as high gas pressure. Now you could always hook a low water cutoff to heat zone 3 as a dry contact, except it's going to give you a high gas pressure fault. So maybe leave a note. So if a technician that didn't set the boiler up knows they're looking for an external low water cutoff, and they don't go down a gas fault when it's a low water cutoff issue. The number 96 plug, that's where that call for heat is. So outdoor sensor, indirect tank connection, and number 96, that call for heat plug. In your 200, it could be a call for heat. It could also be an external demand. It could be external blocking. So there's a lot more functionality of some of the already existing things that were in the 100. You have more functionality of those when you move up to the 200 series. Then you'll get into the dashboards, similar to what we talked about on the 100, except we only have potentially, again, 4 dashboards. I like the device status as my main display, target temperature, actual temperature, percentage of boiler firing rate, burner on symbol, and outdoor temperatures displayed if you have a sensor connected to it. This tells me the Wi-Fi on this control is turned off. If it was turned on, it'd be very just like your cell phone. You get that Wi-Fi symbol up here with 3 lines depending on the signal strength you're getting. DHW screen, just like on the 100, but very simple to see if it's on and operating. Remember, this is only for indirects. So if you put that 200 in with no indirect tank, since there are no combi models, this screen will not be there if there's no indirect paired with it. If you use heat circuits, I want to point this out that if you're using any of the heat circuits, the display is going to actually tell you the room temperature set point. This, although the boiler may be operating at maybe 170-degree supply temperature, this heat circuit's going to tell you what that heat circuit room temperature is, not what the supply temperature is. If you use the heat zones, the zones, remember, are thermostats and pumps. It will say heat zone 1, 2, or 3 on the display. And that will tell you what the actual temperature of the supply temperature is, because it has no feedback from that zone. And then dashboards. So you get those 3 heating dashboards. And when you go into your main menu, it's basically set up the same way. The 200, you can turn heat circuits, heat zones, DHW independently on or off. You can turn the entire system on or off. So again, more open, more functionality in this control. DHW, time programs, you get that one-time heat up. So If you're using the sensor, it's on a time program. You can do a quick heat up. Heat circuits, temperature set points, heating curves, heat zones, heating curves. Circuits and zones can all have separate heat curves. Just always remember, it's always going to go to the highest temperature needed. So protect any low temperature zones with some mixing valves. All the information that you could want in the boiler, all the settings you want to go into. That buzzer, remember, if you push a button, it creates an audible tone. You can turn that on or off. You could also turn the light guide on or off. You could lower the brightness of it. You could turn the buzzer volume level down, or just turn them completely off if somebody doesn't like it. So to recap, expanded capacity offerings in the 100. So you got that 150 and 199, also that 199 combi. All boilers include an onboard pump. All those pumps are ECM. All have diverting valves. So big upgrade in the 200. It used to be like that way back in the 90s. And now we're getting back to that in 2021. But all ECM pumps, and we can change those pump curves. Don't forget about load matching the boilers to the house and then to your indirect system. Integrated cascade up to 15 boilers in the 200, common vent up to 4 boilers. With that horizontal termination, that's going to be a big thing with that sidewall vent termination. Common parts, hopefully you've seen how many common parts there is across the boiler, so you can have less parts on the shelf and less parts for wholesalers, contractors, our sales reps alike. The Vito guide, as well as the commissioning assistant, both of those I think has improved the commissioning and the serviceability of the boiler tremendously. Simple software conversion from NG to LP. So there's no orifice. We haven't talked about an orifice. There's nothing to do with that. We just have to actually tell the boiler what it's operating on, and the boiler will take care of it from there. Wi-Fi connectivity built right into it. So no additional controls, and intuitive touchscreen displays. Once you play with one, I think you'll see that it's extremely easy compared to controls of the past. There was a bit of a learning curve there. That brings me to the end of today's presentation. I really thank everybody for your time today. If you have questions, I'm here to hang out for at least another half an hour if you need me. If everybody drops out, have a great day, great rest of your day. I know it's early over there on the West Coast. You guys still have a full day ahead of you. I do have one question still in here. What if you are commissioning a boiler with the HMI and after completion, the boiler does not operate? That could be on a couple of different things. If you put an outdoor sensor on, you could be in warm weather shutdown. So if you're putting a boiler in the summertime, or you get that hot day, I mean, we're getting still up here in the Northeast, we're about to have a 60-degree day. It's a real hot one out there. So if you guys are still seeing those 80, 85-degree days, you might want to commission it without an outdoor sensor, commission it with fixed set point so that you can operate it, make sure all those zone valves, thermostats, everything in the house operates, and then just recommission it, change to outdoor compensated, put in that outdoor curve to make sure that everything's going to operate correctly. If it doesn't operate, outside of those parameters, I would definitely give our tech service team a call, or maybe just go through and, maybe recommission it the first time. Maybe you answered a question incorrectly. Maybe the indirect's not firing. You forgot to say it has an indirect tank. That would be going into those additional settings, things like that. So, but if those two tips don't quite work for you, I would definitely give our tech service team a call. If these boilers are connected to permanent Wi-Fi, our tech service team can actually look at that boiler live. We can go through and see parameters, things like that, and really help you tremendously if that boiler is already connected to permanent Wi-Fi. And just to reiterate, Viessmann accounts, if you have any other questions, academyus@viessmann.com. I guess I took the wrong image. Everything here is from Canada. Our YouTube, Viessmann North America, that's live. Bunch of other resources, videos, things like that are on there. We're in the process right now of making some more YouTube videos, Veto Guide commissioning, things like that. So hopefully we'll start to spit out some of these short 2 to 4 minute videos. I know those are a big hit. Those are my favorite ones to watch on YouTube on other things I do. Still don't see any open questions here. Again, I'll hang out until everybody's signed off, but feel free to sign off whenever you're ready. Get back to your day. I hope the rest of the day treats you well. Hopefully you guys aren't getting, well, hopefully you're getting the rain like we just had. Or maybe you guys have moistened up from your dry West Coast summer.
I'm fortunate enough to have a nice sunny day here. It's been gloomy and yucky for the last week plus, and now it looks like it's going to be sunny, so I'll take it.
Yep. Say we got a little bit of a Sunday today. We're supposed to hit 60. I might get a chance to mow my lawn because it's been raining for a week. If you see the sign behind me, won't show my pen, but we got some rough weather last night actually in Warwick, Rhode Island. At our home base on the building you see behind me. And it actually blew the V off of our big sign out front. So we are officially Iceman until we get that fixed. So yeah, we've been getting some weather here on the East Coast.
And you should probably leave that for winter. Just be Iceman all winter. Looks like Zach asked something.
Can we keep the webinar on and go through commissioning again? Like to see where we're getting to setting temp on commissioning. Are you talking fixed set point, Zach? I can actually, why don't you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey there. Hey, Patrick.
Hey.
Hey,
are you
great
talking
job,
fixed? Yeah, no problem. Are you talking when you're going fixed set point? I know a lot of your guys
just,
like.
This is for us because we've got ours set up in the class facility, and I got to dig in. We're still waiting for our boilers for the most part, but when you're doing the commissioning on the HMI, there's an option to, if I remember, there's an option to take you right into setting the fixed set point from that, or you can go back into settings and set your temperatures up. And I was looking at how we go. After you do your initial, like that 9-screen shot here, where you end up with your basic setup, instead of having to go back in, I thought that it asked you if you wanted to continue to set the temperatures or not at one point on the commission.
During the commissioning assistant, it will not ask you if you choose fixed set point. So you're not doing any outdoor sensor on the 100. It will just go through the commissioning and it's complete. Your high limit at that point is set to 158 degrees. That's the default. 156, 158. My gut says.
Yeah, what does it ask you if you're a fixed set point versus if you can you go back to the screenshots and we could just go and walk through it?
Yeah, you should still see my screen, correct?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just looking at what the HMI says when you're going through the process of commissioning the boiler for the first time.
That will be
right
here in operating mode. So this is in additional settings. So you'll have to go into, do you want to carry out additional configurations? Yes or no? So you'll hit yes. And then the first question it asked you is operating mode. So that'll be weather compensated with outdoor temperature control, or constant set point would be your other option.
Okay.
And you'd select constant set point.
Okay.
That'll be fixed temperature. Then once you finish the commissioning, because it's not going to ask you any other questions about it.
Can you go, Patrick, go back real quick, if you could. Plug 96 is this. So
that's your TT.
Yeah. And so you just put it on call for heat. That's your TT landing right there.
Yes. And then, so
Fixed
now
intervals.
once your commissioning's completed, because you've selected fixed set point,
Got it.
constant set point, then you'll have to go into your main menu. So you hit the menu button
Yep.
and you go over to settings. And the first question in settings is temperature levels.
Perfect.
Then you'd select here and it'll be set at 158 and you'll be able to go up to 180 from there. And that'll be your high limit at that point, is right here. Otherwise, if you were in outdoor compensated, this will change and this will be outdoor curve.
Right.
So this will either be your outdoor curve or fixed set point will be right under that main settings menu.
Got it. You said high limit, but that's just your fixed set point temperature at that menu, right?
Yeah, that'll be your fixed set point, or some people, I've always called it a high limit.
Oh, okay.
High limit set, when you set your high limit on your
there you go. Okay.
adjustables.
Yeah. So basically that's all my guys have to do. All our guys are pretty simple out here because the weather compensated sometimes doesn't get it's at warm temperatures. It's not great. So the guys go in and they set up for a fixed set point, and then they have to just do one step or two steps back. If they're doing domestic, they go back in settings, set DHW temperature and set your high limit, and then you're done.
Yeah, exactly. For your guys, you just hit fixed set point, and whether you're doing DHW or not, you'll just have to remember to go into this temperature level. Otherwise, it's only going to run. It's like 158 is my gut. 156 or 158. I think it's 158.
Got it.
Because that would be 70 degrees Celsius is 158. So yeah, 158.
Cool. And what was it called? It wasn't called fixed set point. It was called
It's constant set point with RT controller, room temperature controller, thermostat. But there's two options. Hopefully it should be obvious. It's either weather compensated or it's not.
Pick the opposite of weather compensated.
Yeah, exactly. Pick the opposite one.
Yeah. Cool.
But yeah, I know a lot of you guys out there don't use weather outdoor resets because changing the temperature 5 degrees is just not worth it.
Yeah, where it shuts down on the internal logic, too early, because it can get, 62 degrees. You still need heating and maybe it shuts down. But yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah, can't wait to continue to get the boilers out here and get them rolled out.
Yeah, me as well. You guys are already doing great. And if there's anything I can help you with, you know how to get a hold of me.
Yeah, we tried to. I'm also got an email into Miranda to put you on the schedule for coming out and doing a full on training and like you did up in the PNW here as early as you can next year. And then after that, we'll follow up hopefully with a early summer trip back to Rhode Island for some of the contractors.
Yeah, that'd be great. Happy to accommodate with whatever you need, Zach.
Right on. All right. Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Like I said, I'm still going to hang out for any questions or anything that comes up. So don't be afraid to ask anything, or other than that, thanks again, and I really hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.